going to be running this as budget chair, but we need to go ahead and get started.
Okay. In the absence of budget chair, I think vice chair can take over. Now I'm in charge. Good. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh, you thought you were.
She's back.
No, you can go ahead, Ilyon. But we're gonna just start with the ladies anyway. So, Miss Michael, Miss Wigginton, and Miss Quinn are here today with us. So thank you.
So thank you so much. We thought we would start off this afternoon by first reviewing the FY17 third quarter budget review. Since I just presented that on Thursday evening, my intention was not to go back through that presentation again, but just to remind the board that in total we have $6.5 million in funding available from third quarter, and our recommendation was to allocate that towards the budget beginning balance for FY18. So I'm happy to take any questions on third quarter.
Ms. Schultz.
I asked on Thursday night, and I maintain the position that if we are going to allocate it, quote unquote, to beginning balance, that it be attributed, basically encumbered to something in the FY18 budget that is a one-time expense, so that those costs are, we're not immutable to growing the budget, and attributing one-time costs to recurring costs is a bad idea.
Ms. McLaughlin.
Well, I was hoping that there would be.
Okay.
This is a two-way conversation, right?
So I thank you. I do know that you brought that up on Thursday evening. To date, we have not identified anything that would be one-time funding in our FY18 budget that we could earmark for that purpose. Certainly, the board could determine what would be $6.5 million worth of expenditures that they wanted to make one-time in FY18. And we could use that funding specifically for that purpose, but we would need to identify what that item is that we were going to eliminate from recurring funding and then fund with one-time funding.
Okay, so Ms. Derenak-Kofax, I'm happy to provide some time. I believe we possibly could have some time available in the next couple of days to sit down and have a conversation about that and offer some suggestions.
You can begin to offer those now if you like.
Well, I guess I'm a little bit surprised between Thursday and now that there's not one single thing in a $3 billion budget that we contract or buy resources for that could be identified as like, look, this is a one-time shot. So I don't think it's incumbent upon me at this point at the table to extemporaneously identify those, but I am happy to have an offline conversation. But I would encourage staff to continue to potentially more thoroughly scrub, looking for things that we purchase that could, whether that's services or resources, that could be considered a one-time cost.
All right, Ms. McLaughlin.
I don't want to oversimplify Ms. Schultz's inquiry, but I actually do think that every single year one could delve into a $3 billion budget, and you're going to obviously find each year there's different things that we needed to buy this year, and it gets bought. And the next year it can be something else. I'm a little reluctant actually to have staff spending time identifying what in FY18 they would consider one-time funding, and that I'd rather staff first be able to answer the backlog of budget questions that have tens of millions of dollars of implication. Because Ms. Schultz, just to give you an idea, was $6.5 million. Well, $4 million we spend annually on AP and IB test fees. So worst case scenario, and next year we got to find something that we say can't pay for it in FY19. That's $4 million right there. I mean, there are items in this budget and every budget, every single year, that the school system has to make choices on whether they're going to fund it again for the following fiscal year. So I don't feel as inclined to spend board conversation on what did you find to specifically earmark and say that 6.5 will come out in FY19 unless we find something else. I mean, everything's a moving parts with this thing. I think we just make this the simplest work session possible, which is great, $6.5 million. Everybody understands we're not going to go earmark it for our favorite pet project. It's over there to help with our beginning balance. Now let's move on into the bigger challenge, which is FY18 budget and closing the overall gap.
All right, Ms. Corbett Sanders, followed by Ms. Evans.
I was actually going to offer a suggestion. Nobody will be surprised to hear that I've seen an increased growth of contracting over the past 5 years. And perhaps this is an area where by moving this money, the one-time funding to cover some of those contracts, then what it does is also introduce a bit of fiscal discipline going forward to revisit contracts on a year-to-year basis and suggest, maybe we don't have a $30 million line item for contracts, but we have a lower item.
Okay. Ms. Evans.
I apologize, Madam Chair, but I need to certify our closed meeting.
Oh,
I'm going to do this out of order if you don't
All right.
mind. In order to comply with Section 2.2-3712D of the Code of Virginia, it's necessary for the board to certify that since the Fairfax County School Board convened a closed meeting on March 13th, 2013, to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the board during the closed meeting. Do I have a motion? Moved by Mr. Moon, seconded by Mrs. Schultz. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, anyone else on this? I think the consensus of the board is to move the money over. We don't have a specific place or area. We have Ms. Schultz who wants to meet offline, which I'll be happy to do. Ms. Corbett Sanders, who suggested looking at the contracting. She had a specific example at this time. So again, board members, if you have, if you're looking for that, if you're looking through the budget and you have suggestions, please tell Elion or myself and the budget staff, more importantly, so they can, because I can say to you, I think it's a good idea, but it's really then up to our staffing experts to understand what the ramifications would be. So please make sure if you have those suggestions, copy me on it. If you're copying the staff, if you're asking specific questions like, could these monies be applied in this way, make sure Elion and I are copied on this as well, or at least me, and direct it to the staff. Go, Ms. Quinn.
Yes, I just wanted to add one comment. We will go through the budget and see if there is any one type of expenditures, but we did do that a couple of years ago. So I think if there is anything in there, it's going to be very minimal. I think what we're saying is when we want to use this money for one time, you're actually reducing the base, right? So I think to Ms. McLaughlin's point, the budget goes back and forth each year on what we're going to fund regularly and what we're not. So unless there is some reduction that we want to take in some of our programs or departments or central accounts, it's hard to say we're going to use this funding for a one-time cut. Because one-time funding, because once you cut it, it's gone. So I just wanted to make sure there was clarity and wanted to provide that additional information. So when Ms. Corbett Sanders talked about contracting, unless you don't do the work, that work needs to be done either through outsourcing, internal resources, or some other way. So we just need to be clear that we're not going to do that work going forward.
I understand that, but that's also, it's a best practice that we should be looking at things ongoing and considering whether or not we, A, need to do the work, or B, are we doing the work, getting the work accomplished in the most efficient manner. So I think it is helpful.
Absolutely.
Mr. Wilson. And then Ms. Huff.
Thank you. So just to clarify just this point, so I understand a little bit better, and maybe the public as well. So would, when we expended money for the FCP on and the Chantilly Pyramid, was the acquisition of all of the computer and technology, was that a one-time expense? And would it be, if we were to expand, would it be deemed a one-time expense, or is this a recurring expense?
We had used one-time funding for those computers. So if we were to expand FCPS on, there is a recurring component, but the bulk of the FCPS project, which were the computers, was used funded with one-time funding.
So in that case, then, when we submit the ask to the county, then is the percentage increase that was presented, did that reflect the percentage increase to recurring funds, or are one-time expenses netted out from what we're saying is the increase?
The increase goes from, when you do a comparison from budget to budget, we do it from approved to approved, which majority of that funding, the budget is recurring. So when you did a FCPS on, and if you use one-time money, it increases your budget, but it's increased at the revised stage. So you go from an approved stage to a revised stage. When we ask the Board of Supervisors for additional funding, we go from approved to approved, not to include the one-time funding increases.
Well, in that case, then, since the one-time purchase of that technology was included in the approved budget.
The one-time funding was included in the revised, so it's not in the base.
Okay.
So when we asked the county for an increase in funding, it didn't include any funding for FCPS on.
Okay.
Ms. Huff.
I have an accounting question. If we were to not allocate the allocate the 6.5 million to something or not to something, is it reflected in the carryover fund, in the carryover line regardless, or only if we don't agree to allocate it to something?
Let me see if I can make that clear. It depends on how you define carryover. So when you, at year end, what you'll see is all your available balance before carryover, like your ending balance. So let's just say the school system ends with $30 million. But of the 30, if we've already allocated 20 million to use in the following year's budget, what's available is 10 million. So some folks interpret the 10 million to be carryover. Some folks interpret all 30 million to be carried over, right? So it depends on whether or not you're looking for available funding that's carried over.
So at what point does this 6.5 million become unavailable?
When you vote to spend it for a specific purpose.
Okay.
So if the board accepts this recommendation, when you approve third quarter, right, you've then set that funding aside for FY18, so then it's no longer available.
So it would be in carryover, but it would be unavailable. It'd be encumbered.
Exactly.
Any other questions? Ms. McLaughlin.
So I know Mr. Wilson raised this about the one-to-one initiative, and you look at what's going on in Chantilly. Part of what I understand happens with this one-to-one rollout is it's the technology costs of buying the actual devices. So would this 6.5 million be something that technically, if budgetarily the board continues to fund the one-to-one, that this could then be earmarked or just a way of demonstrating into the public of, we had this third quarter carryover and, you know, we were able to say, okay, this is technically one-time funding because it's what we would need to fund the next pyramid. Is that an accurate way of capturing it?
It is accurate. The one thing I would caution us about long-term is if we continue to roll out FCPS on with one-time funding, we would need in the future to continue to make those one-time allocations, or when that technology needed to be refreshed, we wouldn't have funding available. But you're absolutely correct.
Anyone else before I go backs? One go back, Ms. Schultz.
So you just said, Ms. Michael, if we continue to roll out FCPS on, where is FCPS on expected to be rolled out next year?
We haven't
Yeah, I was
Dr.
going to say
Walker?
we haven't made that determination yet. We had talked about some ideas, but we have a evaluation coming to the board a little bit later this spring on the current one. And
Are you aware that there are students in buildings that have been told that they're getting devices next year?
not through FCPS on. We haven't targeted. Here's where FCPS on is coming. So maybe there's some.
I think that there's a. I'll be happy to share that there's a communications deficit because there are definitely buildings that have been told that they're getting one-to-one devices next year. So, so that was going to be one of my offerings on the non-rollout is if there was one-time funding used to purchase equipment that was theoretically for a digital rollout, that we not do that until we figure out what's going on with the long-term professional development, the long-term training, and the long-term, asset management, et cetera, et cetera.
We
Looks
have
like
made
Ron.
no announcements at all from central funds for FCPS on to additional schools. Some schools have requested to be a part. We've been very clear that we have not made any decisions. The only thing I could perhaps think of is a school using their own funds, maybe saying that they'd like to, telling their students they may want to participate in it. But centrally, we've been very clear. So please share that with us, Ms. Schultz. We would love to look and see
If there's some
what
school that
happened.
has enough money in their local funds to buy a one-to-one device for every single student in the building, I'd like to know what school that is.
I think the schools that I've heard of, it wasn't necessarily for the whole building, but it was a certain grade level they were looking at or a certain subject. But please share that with us. We'd love to. But I want to reiterate, we have not centrally announced to any schools that you will be a part of any expansion because we have not made any decisions on if, number one, we would expand, and two, if, then who.
Right. So the concern I have is that there's been no presentation to the board about what the teacher impacts are with this, what the professional development load is, what, frankly, a one-to-one device is turning into one-to-one professional development to bring teachers up to speed, and the scalability of that when we're talking about, the long-term impacts, and then whether or not this has been tied to student achievement.
Correct.
And we do have on June 12th work session scheduled to do that, and we have our Johns Hopkins has been doing an evaluation on all of those areas you just referenced, which is precisely why we have not made any decision whether we will expand or move forward. So on June 12th, you will be receiving a report from Johns Hopkins as well as from staff on answering each of those areas you just outlined.
Terrific. Thank you.
There is no funding for the expansion in our FY18 advertised budget, just to be clear.
All right. Seeing no further questions. Any? It looks like there's a question, Miss.
To clarify that there's grant funding that has gone to some of the one-to-one. And so it's not all coming from our operating budget. There have been some DOD grants and elsewhere.
Right.
There are for some high schools, the e-learning backpack grant for some of the high schools, not the Chantilly Pyramid, but for some of our other high schools that they have received that funding, yes.
Okay. All right. Seeing one more question.
So I guess to be perfectly clear, is there dollars in the FY18 budget for FCPS on above what was in FY17's budget?
No.
Not centrally. Okay, thank you.
Okay. And with that, this part of the work, this part of the budget work session is over. We will take a 2-minute break, and we will move from third quarter to a review again of the advertised 18. So 2-minute break.